Hello folks, first one for today is by marko.b. Okay, overall I think the mix needs a bit more of a top end boost. It sounds kind of muffled. Especially kick and snare need more top range. The snare needs more crack in the top range and the kick more click. And I think then by comparison the guitars would also sound kind of muffled. Not necessarily, so definitely the drums could use a bit more top range. And the bass guitar could use more 100 Hz range to really fill up that low end. In this blasting machine. Okay, the vocals I noticed do have a delay going on after them on the quarter notes. At least if I'm hearing that right. That delay is quite low in volume and also a little bit muffled. I suspect you pulled out some of the top range. But still, the vocals feel dry. Like there's no real depth to them, no real space and room. So you may want to fiddle a little bit more with your reverbs. And reverbs can be kind of tricky. In such a dense mix, you want to make sure that they are a bit more upper mid-range focused and not so much lower mid-range, because reverbs are completely lost in the lower mid-range. Much rather that would just muddy stuff up. So yeah, you kind of want to make sure you choose a good reverb and perhaps also do some EQ shaping on it. Just wait. That solo needs to come up. It's too far in the background. But otherwise, there are no big problems with this mix. It's just a couple of tweaks. The drums punch through nicely, although they could use a little bit of top range. But otherwise, you are on the right track, definitely. Next one is by Cherchi. There is something going on with the bass guitar on the lower range that's very messy. At this point, I kind of want to say there may be too much distortion on the bass. and that's kind of messing up the low end, making it very muddy and undefined. But we'll see that a little bit further on. I gotta be careful now. I want to say the mix is too bright, but that just might be because the former mix was more subtle and subdued in the top range. You notice here with the guitars, there's just something completely overbearing and messing stuff up. I still want to say it's the bass guitar, but could be that the guitars also are a bit too heavy-handed. Wait, let me look for that little part where you only hear the guitars. And the guitar still works, so I think it may be more the bass guitar. Yeah, I think it's the bass guitar. You notice in that second verse it's quite heavily distorted. Perhaps try easing up on that distortion. Make it more growly, more mid-gains, and less modern high-gain distorted. Because the guitars themselves already have quite a bit of distortion, so I wouldn't heavily distort the bass guitar as well. That's just messing stuff up. Yeah, I think the solo could come up a little bit. Frequency-wise, it stands out nicely. It's not masked by the rhythm guitars, but it is a bit low in volume. It still could pop out a little bit more. And just raising the volume, I suspect, would already be enough. So, otherwise, this is a very powerful sounding mix. That's pretty good. It's not easy to make a mix sound very powerful and in your face without it being squashed and pumping and whatnot. Next one is by Ramón Pankow. Okay, for this being your first rock mix, the guy usually does EDM, he says in this email, or at least electronic stuff. Yeah, you get the point. For your first real rock mix, that is actually not a bad job you did here. The guitars sound a bit nasally and harsh in that 2 to 4K range. Yeah, so there you might want to tweak your frequency balance a little bit. I'm also not sure what VST or what plugin you use for the amps. It can kind of depend really on the amp sim if it sounds cheap or not. There are free amp sims out there that are really good, like the Emissary. But there are also a bunch out there that meh. The vocals need to come up in volume. I like the sound of the drums, but they kind of need a bit more oomph. For example, the kick could use perhaps a little bit more top range click, just to punch through a little bit better, because by comparison to the rest of the drum mix, the kick sounds kind of rough, kind of too poofy. So a little bit more of the click would make it fit with the rest of the drums better, and it would help it to cut through the mix a little bit more. And the snare could come up a bit in volume. But I want to say it could also benefit from some saturation to make sure you get the peak more under control while the body of the snare sound comes up a little bit more. Yeah, and the solo could use a bit more distortion. It's again this thing, the higher notes are lower in volume just by nature. And in order to compensate for that, to get enough sustain out of it and to make each note stand up mostly equally or stand out mostly equally, you want to push them a little bit more, give them more distortion. But otherwise, for this being your first rock mix, you're definitely on a good way. So, next one is by Andrey Pryshak. Okay, the vocals need to come up in volume. Something weird with the overheads going on. It sounds like you have a very steep filter somewhere in the high range, around 10, 12K or something around those lines. But I kind of want to say it's only on the overheads. I don't really notice that cutoff in the vocals. But it doesn't sound like it's from low quality rendering. Low quality rendering sounds a little bit different than this, so usually. But yeah, take it with a grain of salt. I'm not 100% sure what's going on here, but those overheads are definitely hitting the ear wrong. If you put a low pass filter on them, that's kind of steep, then just take it off. So except for these two pointers, vocals needing to come up in that harsh cutoff on the overheads, the rest of the mix sounds pretty good actually. Yep, and that's about everything I can say. Next one is by Digital Metal. Okay, that kick definitely needs to come out. It's thumping through the mix a little bit too much. And when you take that down in volume, I suspect you would also need to raise the top range click so it still cuts through enough. And also the snare feels kind of dry. Sounds like you forgot about the clean guitar here? And solo needs to come up in volume too. That's about everything I can say about this mix. You're definitely on the right track. Just a couple of tweaks and you're pretty much good to go. Next one is by OPeCKiE Productions. Okay, couple of things here. First of all, the vocals need to come down. And the rhythm guitars as well. The right guitar is louder than the left one, which puts it all out of balance, and it seems it also has much more distortion than the left one. You may want to watch out for that you keep both sides a bit more equal. Yeah, you notice the guitars and vocals together are a little bit overbearing, and they are drowning out the snare. The snare is pretty low in the mix, kind of buried. And also the kick is thumping through a lot in the lower range, and it's kind of making the mix pump a little bit. So you may want to watch out for some volume balances. Yeah, and that is again it for what I can say about that mix. Next one is by jvms. This is a really solid mix. It's just the vocals that could come up in the B or 1.5. It's really not much, just to make them sit in front a little bit more. Yeah, and the solo could come up a little bit as well. Otherwise, this is a very solid mix. Next one is by Giovanni Montiel. This is also a pretty solid mix. The only thing I'm really noticing at this point is the kick and snare could be a bit more at an equal level when it comes to punching through the mix. The snare punches through really well. I'm not seeing a waveform. I kind of suspect you may get a little bit of crazy spikes from the snare. But I'm not 100% sure on that. If you do, then saturation is your friend. But the kick is a bit more subdued. It's still audible and all, but it's noticeably not as punchy as the snare. And you kind of want to try to get them at a more equal level so they feel more connected. Okay. I was thinking something about the rhythm guitars is bugging me, and they are too muffled. There's too less... there's too little of top range in there that gives them presence and makes them sit well in the mix. So you may want to take back some of that high-end filtering. And solo could perhaps also come up a little bit in volume. But otherwise, this is also a pretty solid mix. Next one is by Jeffrey Wornhoff. Okay, the guitar tones definitely need a little bit of work. They are too low gained, I kind of want to say, and too muffled on the low notes. It feels like you have more of a mid-gained amp and you didn't put any kind of signal shaping booster pedal in front of it to tighten it up. And the secondary guitars also feel too clean. Drums could also still use a little bit of work. It's hard to tell what exactly you could do because I'm not sure how you processed this. I kind of want to say you might be getting high enough peaks from the snare, but the body of the snare that comes just after the peak is kind of weak. So here perhaps also parallel compression can help to beef it up, make it a bit more punchy and thumpy. And also the kick could use a bit more punch and come up in volume a little bit. Yeah, and that's also all I can say about this mix. Next is by Taurean Mixing. Yeah, and your mix's track is not available. It was not found. So, again, I can't judge what I can't hear. So last one for today goes to Eric. Doesn't say anything else, just Eric. Let's see what your SoundCloud profile says. E.S.McDermott. Mixing and Mastering. Okay, I kind of want to say this is a pretty good mix. The snare sounds interesting. I haven't heard that kind of style in any other mix so far, but it works perfectly fine. It punches through nicely, it's audible, it does its job. And also in the context of the music, it works perfectly fine. So it's just cool to see something a little bit more fresh, or hear something a bit more fresh. I do believe the kick could use a bit more top range click though, to punch through a little bit more consistently and also to get a bit more on a cutting through level as the snare. Again, the same idea as before, you want to have kick and snare kind of on the same level of presence, the same amount of cutting through the mix. Yeah, and the solo needs to come up a little bit in volume, but otherwise this is a pretty solid mix. Okay, and that is it again for today. Just 3 more videos to go. I will see you in the next one.